Hiya, it's Robin here. It's lovely to see you. Now, today we're going to meet Dr. Lizzie Good, and she is a climate scientist who currently works for the Met Office. Lizzie is also a Christian. The interview is in 5 parts, and there are some pauses for discussion every so often.
Lizzie, thank you so much for joining us for this assembly. So your job is as a scientist, but before you tell us about that, can you tell us what subjects you enjoy doing at school and then which subjects you did for your GCSEs and A levels that then led you on this path to becoming a scientist?
So I've always loved maths and science. Those have really been my main things, but also music as well. I write my own songs and sing and play quite a lot of instruments. I've never been very good at art, so I think that's definitely been my creative outlet. But for my A levels, I chose maths, physics, chemistry, and geology, which is the study of the earth. We look at a lot of rocks in geology. And I think maths is a brilliant subject to study if you're interested in doing any science, because we use maths across all areas of science. It helps us to understand scientific information or data properly. We use lots of graphs and numbers in science.
Lizzie, when you went to university, what did you study at university?
So I developed a real love for geology and physics during my A levels. So I went on to study geophysics at university, which is all about the physics of the earth and how the earth came to be the earth we know today. So after my first degree, I then went on to do another degree called a PhD or doctorate, where I worked with observations from satellites in space to study the temperature of the Earth's surface. So I'm called Dr. Lizzie Good at work.
The children hear you being called doctor and they might think of a medical doctor they go and see when they're sick, but you're not a medical doctor.
No, actually, the PhD stands for a Doctor of Philosophy, which sounds a bit odd, but actually any kind of scientific research doctorate, when you call a doctor, is this kind of, it says different from being a medical doctor.
Lizzie, can you tell us a bit about the job you do now and the science that involves?
So I work at the Met Office. There's lots of people know the Met Office produces our weather forecasts in the UK. So people know whether it's going to be sunny or raining or hot or cold over the next few days or even weeks. However, we also at the Met Office look at how the weather changes over much longer time scales, such as the last 100 or 200 years or even longer. And we call this climate science. And I manage a team of scientists at the Met Office who study how the Earth's climate is changing using data recorded at weather stations and by satellites in space. We know the Earth's climate is changing because of the way we're living as human beings, and we call this global warming, or more correctly now, actually, we use the term global climate change. So in the team that I manage, we make data sets and use these to study how the Earth's climate is changing. For example, we make lots of different measurements over different places on the Earth's surface and then use this information to work out how the temperature on the Earth is changing, where it's getting warmer very quickly, where it's getting warmer more slowly. And in many ways, working out what the data are actually telling us is the easy bit. Lots of the work we do is actually focusing on making these data sets better, which is a very tricky task because there's lots of things we need to think about. For example, sometimes a weather station needs to be moved to a new place. For example, if a city is built around it or something like that, or the satellite we're using in space stops working and we need to use a different one. So we need to be really careful with these things to make sure that these changes in the data that we're using don't cause jumps in our data sets that might give us the wrong result. And so that's the really tricky bit.
Lizzie, you are a Christian, and some people are surprised that Christians work as scientists. Do you see a link between your faith and your science?
Well, I actually think my faith and my scientific beliefs complement each other. They fit together in my life like a jigsaw puzzle. So I think science really tells me how things happened. It explains our natural world. For example, how we have some areas of our planet that are covered in land, how other areas are covered by water, how animal and plants have evolved over the 4.5 billion years since the Earth was created, why it rains, lots of other things. And we now have a lot of scientific evidence to explain how all these things happened. On the other hand, my faith tells me why things have happened. It's spiritual and it gives me meaning and purpose to my life. And for me, because I think faith is quite a personal thing as well as a community thing. For me, this is love, friendship, community, how people and other life on earth are connected and looked after by God. And I think Christianity provides amazing guidance on how we should live our lives to the best that we can, be the best people that we can, how to be kind to people. And I think it also provides space to think about other people. I think modern life for me especially feels really crazy and busy a lot of the time. And I find my faith is very calming and helpful. And it's really my faith and not science that helps me get through the difficult times in my life. So I actually think that science and Christianity to go together hand in hand. And actually it may surprise you to know that many of the scientists that I work with in the Met Office and all over the world, because I work with a lot of people in other countries as well, are also Christians. And it's actually, there's a very big scientific community who are also Christians and people who are very devout actually as well. So I think they absolutely go together hand in hand.
Lizzie, do you see any problems between your faith and science?
No, I know that some people find it difficult to believe and respect the Bible and believe in science at the same time. And I think that the New Testament, which of course tells us about the life of Jesus, is probably easier for people to accept. But the Old Testament is full of stories that seem to disagree with what we know scientifically today. For example, how these different animals, including how humans came to exist on Earth. And I struggled with this myself, actually, in my late teens and early adult life. And I actually lost my faith for a few years. But over time, I've come to accept that the Bible is a book of its time. I've discussed this with lots of other people, and it's been some very interesting discussions. It was written a very long time ago, very, very long time ago, when we knew much less about the science and we didn't have all the scientific discoveries like we do today. And it was written by people, I think, trying to make sense of the world that God has given us based on what they knew at the time. So I think it's important to recognise the Bible is not a scientific textbook. Of course, with scientific textbooks, we're updating these all the time. Sometimes every few years when new information comes to light, we have to update our textbooks. But the Bible has stayed the same. So I find it helpful to think about the Old Testament in particular in a more metaphoric way. So not reading the words exactly as they're written. For example, in Genesis 1 talks about how the earth was created over 7 days. But if you think about the word day just meaning a period of time, like a few 100 million years, and not a day like we think of today being 24 hours, then what is said in Genesis is actually similar to our scientific beliefs about how the earth was created. It's remarkably similar, actually. And there are actually several examples of where the Bible was ahead of its time scientifically. For example, the water cycle, which describes how water is transferred between the Earth's surface, rivers and oceans into the atmosphere and the clouds. And that's explained in the Bible when I think many people of that time thought that surface water came from other places or under the ground and things. So I think once you relax about these things and keep reminding yourself that the Bible is a very, very old book written a very long time ago, then I actually find I don't think there's a problem in believing in both science and in God.
Brilliant. Lizzie, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the answers you've given us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been really great and really interesting to think about these things in lots of detail. Thank you.
Just to confuse you, we're going to have our tricky question of the week a little bit early in this assembly, because the question actually relates to what we've just heard Lizzie talking about, our science and faith in conflict. So listen to Glyn's thoughts and then you can have your discussion. Our science and faith in conflict.
There's been a lot of discussion about the relationship between faith and science, and some people believe that they are incompatible. I'm not sure that I agree with that point of view. In the Bible, we are told why God created the world. He created it because of love. He loved and wants to be loved. Science can tell us how the world was created and how this wonderful planet that we live on and the wonderful diversity of life, and then we look into the sky and see the wonderful universe, then we see again something of God's nature and character. But science is able to try and help us understand how that happened. And when we really look into how it happens, it creates even more wonder. And so the two really do work together. Science shows us how, creation or the Bible will show us why.
This week we have a slice of English folk music from The Destroyers. The band had 15 members when they recorded Hole in the Universe. Now, back in 2007, scientists found a great cosmic nothingness nearly 1 billion light years across, which they called a void, and the void has inspired this song. The void has become a hole for poetic purposes. In the video, the singer and the teenage boy seem to be existing in parallel worlds. If the boy looked up from his phone and into the mirror, he may be surprised at what's happening in the void. Enjoy.
Scientists peered over the edge of emptiness and stared into the void, to the consternation in a distant constellation spied a hole in the universe. It is in Uranus, a region of the sky, southwest of Orion, but nobody knows why. 1 billion light years wide and a googleplex away, there's a hole in the universe. There's a hole in the ozone, the bottom of the world, now a hole in the universe. There's a hole in the ocean where plumes of oil unfurl, now a hole in the universe. It's devoid of all dark matter, stars, galaxies, or gas. Nothing exists there of energy or mass. 1 billion light years wide, a googleplex away, there's a hole in the universe. A hole no one can repair. A hole in the cosmic underwear. A hole no one can reverse. There's a hole in the universe. A hole in the heart, no hole in the head, no hole in the road, no hole in the bed. Now there's a hole in the universe.
For our prayer and reflection time, we have a labyrinth. Labyrinths are ancient pathways found across the world. The winding path helps us to unwind, to let go, and to rest. Now, members of the early church, as well as medieval pilgrims, have used them as a support for prayer. The idea is to slowly trace the labyrinth path with a finger, which is going to be a little bit tricky because it's on screen. So either the teacher could use a pointer for everyone to follow, or you'll have to close one eye and trace it with your finger. Pause when you get to the centre of the labyrinth for a little while and just enjoy your own thoughts, and then trace your way back to the start. I'll leave you all to Labyrinth, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now. Bye.